The lantern flickered like it wasn't sure if it wanted to live. Miles' cutter held it high anyway, boots sinking deep into the Wyoming snow as dusk crawled across the valley and erased the last scraps of color from the sky. The mountains were only silhouettes now, sharp as broken teeth. Behind him, the wind carried the sound of wolves. Distant, but close enough to hurry his steps. He wasn't out here for wolves. He was out here because of a shape he'd seen in the snow. Too still, too small, too wrong. The fence line stretched along his land like the ribs of a dying beast. And there, right at the bend where the pine trees grew crooked from old lightning scars. He'd seen it. Not deer, not coyote, not fallen branch, a person. Miles tightened his grip on the lantern and forced himself forward, each step sinking up to his shin. The storm had passed 2 days ago, but winter still had its claws deep in everything. He reached the shape and kneeled. A woman lay half-buried in snow, cloak torn, hair crusted with ice. One hand was outstretched like she'd been reaching for something. Maybe hope, maybe escape. Her dress was ruined at the hem, soaked through as if she had waded through water or deep drifts. Her skin looked ghost white, but Miles wasn't the type to assume death before checking. He brushed snow from her cheek and flinched at how cold she was, cold enough to burn. He pressed his fingers to her throat, a beat, a flutter, faint as a moth wing. "Hell," he whispered. "You're alive." He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask what she'd been running from. The wilderness didn't wait for explanations. He slid one arm under her shoulders and lifted her. She sagged against him like a broken branch. Too light, too fragile. Lantern swinging wildly, he trudged toward his cabin. The windows glowed warm against the blue-dark snow, a small pocket of life in a land that tried to kill everything. On the porch, a little face pressed against the frosted glass. "Daddy?" The door flew open, warm light spilling out. "Is someone hurt?" "Inside, Nora. Move the quilts to the fire." His daughter, 8 years old, dark curls messy from napping by the fire, sprinted to obey. She always obeyed. She'd learned early what winter could do if you hesitated. Miles carried the woman to the hearth and laid her on the braided rug. The fire popped, heat washing over them. Nora dragged quilts bigger than she was and dropped them beside her father. "Is she gonna die?" Nora whispered. "Not tonight." He wasn't sure, but he wouldn't say anything else in front of his daughter. He peeled off the frozen cloak, boots stiff as wood, hands scratched raw with bleeding cuts. Her face was scratched too. "Branches, maybe, or something worse." "Fetch hot stones," Miles said. Nora nodded and hurried off. He wrapped the quilts around the stranger, one layer at a time. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. A tremor shook her whole body like her soul was trying to decide whether it wanted to stay. When Miles touched her face again, her eyes fluttered open. Just a sliver. She saw him. Just enough to register the firelight behind him, the rough lines of his face, the wild worry in his eyes. Her lips parted. A word formed. He leaned close. "Run?" Then her eyes rolled back and she went still. Miles's stomach twisted. Whatever she was running from wasn't gone yet. But he didn't have the luxury of fear. He worked fast, rubbing her arms, placing hot stones wrapped in cloth along her sides, holding her hands between his palms to force circulation back. Minutes passed. 20. Maybe more. Finally, her breathing steadied. Not normal, but steady. Nora sat beside her father, small hands folded in tight fists. "Daddy," she whispered, "is she a bad lady?" Miles looked at the woman's torn dress, bruised wrists, dried blood along her jaw. "No," he said quietly. "Someone did her bad." Nora nodded as if that made sense. Children understood danger better than adults gave them credit for. The woman stirred again, faintly. Her fingers twitched. Miles placed another blanket over her. "You're safe now," he murmured. "Whoever you're running from won't find you here." But a small, cold knot formed in his gut anyway. He wasn't sure that was true. Hours passed before the woman woke again. When she did, dawn was pushing pale light through the frost-covered windows. The storm clouds had cleared overnight, leaving the world too bright, too cold, too quiet. Miles sat in a chair beside the fire. Boots off, shirt sleeves rolled, hat tossed on the table. There were deep lines in his face. grief carved into bone. The woman tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her side and she gasped. Miles was at her side in a heartbeat, steady hand on her back. "Easy," he murmured. "Take it slow." Her eyes focused on him, still cloudy with exhaustion. "Where am I?" "My cabin. Couple miles north of the foothills." She blinked hard, trying to recall. "My name, Elena." Her voice cracked, raw as scraped bark. She swallowed. Don't strain yourself." "No." Her breathing hitched. I'm a governess. Or I was. She stopped. Pain, not from her body, crossed her face. Fear. Memory. Something she wasn't ready to say. "Whatever happened," Miles said softly, "you're safe here." Her gaze drifted to the fireplace. Then to Nora, curled in a rocking chair with a quilt around her shoulders, half awake, half watching. Elena's lip trembled. You saved me?" Miles shrugged like it wasn't anything. Like he hadn't carried her through a blizzard, as if she weighed nothing. "Found you on my fence line," he said. "Couldn't exactly leave you for the wolves." Nora sat up straighter. "I helped too. I brought the blankets." Elena let out a small sound, almost a laugh, but not quite. It was brittle, fragile, like something that hadn't been used in a long time. "Thank you," she whispered. Nora beamed. Miles's jaw tightened. Not in anger, but because something had shifted in the cabin. The kind of shift that made a lonely man stay very still, like if he breathed too loudly it might break. By midday, Elena could sit up without collapsing. Miles carved a piece of kindling with his knife, movement slow and steady. Nora sat cross-legged, at the table tracing patterns. In the frost collected on the window, Elena sipped warm broth, hands trembling. She watched them both, the quiet man with shoulders built from years of chopping wood and burying pain, the little girl who moved carefully like she'd been taught not to be a burden. Elena sensed loss in the room. It clung to the walls like smoke. She set the tin cup down. "Your wife," she said softly. "Is she?" Miles didn't look up. "Gone," he said. One word, heavy as an anvil. Nora's eyes dropped. Elena regretted asking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Miles nodded once, as if that topic was closed. Forever. But grief hung in the air anyway, even after the fire popped loud enough to startle Nora. Later, Elena tried to stand. Her ankles screamed. Her ribs felt cracked. Her vision swam. Miles caught her before she fell. "You're staying put," he said. "I can't," she whispered, panic rising fast and sharp. "They'll look for me. They'll come this way." "Who?" She shook her head too quickly, wincing at the pain. "I can't. I just need to leave before someone finds me. Before they find your daughter. I won't let anyone else get hurt." Miles's expression hardened. Not cold, protective. "You're not stepping foot outside till you can stand on your own. No one's finding you here, and no one's touching Nora." "But, no." The finality in his voice made the fire crackle louder. Elena sank back onto the blankets, breathing fast. Nora watched from the table, chewing her lip. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Is someone coming?" "No," he said firmly. "Eat your bread." But Elena had seen it. The flicker of hesitation he tried to bury. Someone might be. Miles knew it. And so did she. Night crept in early, dragging the cold with it. Nora fell asleep in Elena's lap after insisting she wasn't tired. Her small body was warm, her breath soft and even. Elena brushed a curl from the girl's forehead. "She's sweet," she murmured. "She's everything," Miles said quietly from the fire. Elena looked at him. His gaze was on the flames, but his mind was far away. "You raised her alone?" she asked. "Since she was 6. His jaw tightened. "Her mother died birthing our son. He didn't make it either." The words were rough, scraped raw from disuse. Elena's heart folded in on itself. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. Miles didn't nod this time. He just kept staring at the fire, like it was the only thing holding him together. When Elena finally drifted to sleep, nightmares clawed at her, hands grabbing her, voices shouting, a man's angry breath against her ear, the wagon, the freezing river, the gunshot. Miles woke to her crying out, her body thrashing under the quilts. He knelt beside her. "Elena!" Her breathing was ragged. Her fingers clawed at the blankets. "Elena, wake up!" Her eyes shot open. She gasped, chest heaving. Miles grabbed a cloth, wiped her forehead. "You're all right," he murmured. "It was just a dream." But she shook her head violently. "No dream. They chased me. The Odell brothers. They wanted to sell me north. I escaped the wagon during the storm." Her hands trembled uncontrollably. "I shouldn't have brought danger here." Miles's voice dropped low. "No one's crossing my land without me knowing." "That won't stop them," she whispered. "They're cruel. They don't quit." He didn't flinch. "Neither do I." The firelight cracked across his jaw, and in that moment Elena realized something. This man had suffered enough grief to break one life, maybe two. Yet he was still standing, still protecting, still choosing to live, and he'd chosen to save her. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt something unfamiliar warming her chest. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. Perhaps too fragile. Because somewhere out in the dark, wolves howled, closer than they had the night before. Miles stood slowly. "That ain't wolves," he said. Elena tensed. "What is it?" He picked up his rifle. "Trouble." In the corner, Nora stirred. "Daddy?" Miles didn't take his eyes off the window. "It's fine, honey. Go back to sleep." But Elena recognized the sound too. The crunch of snow. Heavy. Deliberate. Boots. Many. Coming closer. Miles raised the lantern again, jaw tight. Snow reflected faint light from the porch. And in the distance, just beyond the fence line, torches. 3 of them. Moving. Hunting. Her. Miles exhaled slowly. "Elena," he whispered, "get behind me." The flames outside flickered. The footsteps grew louder. Winter had brought Elena to his cabin. But something else had followed her there. Something that wasn't leaving without a fight. They came like bad weather, blunt, relentless, and smelling of stale tobacco and iron. Torches cut through the dark beyond the fence. Thin columns of orange that trembled as the men approached. Their horses stamped, impatient, breath steaming the frozen air. Faces under wide hats, scarves wrapped tight. The Odells. Rough-fingered, hard-eyed hunters of misfortune. Elena had said their name like a curse. Miles recognized it like a bruise. "Hide!" he hissed, not taking his gaze from the window. Elena, Nora pressed close to her, slipped back toward the loft where the quilts were stacked. Miles moved like he always did. Deliberate, efficient. The way a man who spent his life knowing how not to waste motion moves. He closed the blinds, smoothed the rug over the hearth, and set the lantern low so its light wouldn't betray them. There was a knock at the door, 3 hard raps that sounded like bone on wood. Miles opened the door a sliver. "Hello?" a voice called. Gravel and whiskey and a mean sort of amusement softened it. "Morning, Cutter." Tom Odell stood framed in torchlight. 2 brothers behind him. Bigger, thicker in the shoulders, faces like winter storms. Miles's jaw tightened. "Morning." "We hear tell a woman's been found on your land," Tom said. "Folks in town say she belongs to us. Might be a mistake." Miles kept his tone flat. Keep them guessing, he thought. Tom let out a sour chuckle. "You're a blunt one, Cutter. Ain't no mistake. She run off the wagon that was destined north. Odell boys recover what's ours." Nora, crouched in the loft, pressed her face to the rafters and listened. Her small fingers dug crescents into the wood. Miles felt the blood at his temples. "She ain't going nowhere with you." Tom smiled like a man who'd paid for a thing and intended to take it. "We ain't asking." The brothers' boots crunched on the porch. One of them reached for the latch. Miles planted himself in the doorway so the man had to step over him to get in. He didn't look like a man who wanted to fight. He looked like a man who, in a single small motion, could snap a bone. Miles had the sort of calm that comes from grief, and a purpose welded into the ribs. "You can turn around now," he said. Tom's boot hit the threshold. "You want trouble, Cutter? We can make it trouble for you. For your girl. For the whole place." The word girl like a spear aimed at his chest. Nora stilled in the loft. "You don't know what you're taking," Miles said, voice low. "You get off my land." Tom's hand twitched, and for a second Elena thought she saw something like regret wash over his face. Or maybe that was the torchlight. Or maybe she'd been taught to see ghosts in the smallest aches of men's faces. "Now that's a shame," Tom said. "Because the law's on our side. paper says she belongs to us." Miles heard the weight of the claim and knew how flimsy law could be at the edge of nowhere. Paper or not, he couldn't set a woman back into the hands of monsters. "You'll need to sign out the taking," he said. "And that takes paperwork. It takes time. Weather's foul. Trails are treacherous." Tom laughed, a thin bone sound. "We don't need paperwork when we can ride fast and take what we want." He stepped into the cabin. The warmth hit him like a slap. He blinked at the fire, at the woman wrapped in quilts, at the child watching like a small sentinel above them. Tom's gaze lingered on Nora. Miles braced. "You know this one?" Tom asked. "No," Miles said. "We don't want trouble." Tom's men moved in a casual, predatory arc. The larger brother, Hank, reached for the quilts. Elena's heart slammed. For a breath she imagined him lifting Nora like a toy, like a thing. "Hands off," Miles said. He shoved Hank. Not hard. Enough. It sent a ripple through the group that might have been a shove or a challenge. Hank's fist came up. The cabin stunk suddenly of sweat and the metal tang of impending violence. Tom's hand hovered near a gun at his hip. Elena tried to speak. "Don't," she begged. But the word died in the frost of the room. Hank swung. Fast. Crude. Miles ducked and met him with a movement honed by years of splitting. Logs and carrying burdens. The world narrowed into muscle memory. Block, step, wait, throw. Hank went down with a grunt, the air knocked from him. Tom's boots stamped. "Fight fair, Cutter," he barked. He was all teeth now. Miles didn't want to fight. He wanted them gone. He wanted them to turn back and forget this place. He wanted to contain this storm like anything a man could hold. Hank scrambled up, anger turning his face the color of frozen blood. He lunged again. Nora screamed and Elena's hands clamped like iron around the child. "Stop," she said, voice thin and breaking. "Please." That was the sound that cracked something in Tom. He'd come prepared to take. But he hadn't expected pleading. Maybe that's what bothered him more than any blow. Men like Tom preferred the clean certainty of domination, not the messy human stuff that made them uneasy. A shot rang out. Every head jerked toward the door. Old Mr. Talbot from the next ranch. A man who'd mended fence for miles since before the boy was born, stood on the porch with an old rifle in his hands. His face was a map of years, and he was breathing hard from running. "You get the bloody hell off my neighbor's land," Talbot rasped. The Odells froze like dogs hearing a whistle. Sheriff's men were 2 days' ride away and wouldn't arrive in time. But the arrival of one angry neighbor, with a steady aim, was enough to complicate the hunter's plans. Tom jerked his chin at his brothers. "This ain't worth it," he muttered. "We'll come back." They left like wolves slipping back into the dark. Torches bobbing, curses muttered under breath. Miles watched them go, every muscle taut. He felt like a man who'd held his breath for too long, who'd forgotten how to release it easily. When the last torch winked out, he shut the door and leaned his forehead against the wood. Nora slid from Elena's lap and ran to him, arms flung round his waist. "Daddy, they tried to take Miss Elena." Miles bent and pressed his cheek to the top of her head. "They tried," he said, "but they won't." Elena's hands shook. She'd never felt more exposed, more grateful, more ashamed. "You shouldn't have done that," she told Miles. He shrugged, tired. "You were left on my fence. Couldn't leave you." She wanted to tell him about the wagon, about the promises of innocuous-seeming strangers and the betrayal that followed. She wanted to tell him about the night the river took the rest of their party and left her, bruised and running. But words were slippery with the others outside, and the threat hadn't gone away. It had only slunk past the corner of Miles's land. Instead, she went to the window and pressed her forehead to the glass. Snow lay heavy on the fence. The world outside looked quiet and indifferent, blank as fresh paper. But Elena had learned the world could fold into violence without warning. "You could stay," Miles said gently, as if he'd read her thought, "till the road's clear, till they forget." Her laugh was small. "You don't know what they'd do if they caught me." "I do." His voice was low and sure. "And I say they won't." They sat in the afterglow of the fight like souls who'd been given an extra hour. Talbot mumbled about sheriff and horses, slept in the barn for the night. Nora insisted on feeding him bread and butter as if hospitality could smooth over the masculine violence. In the days that followed, Elena learned the rhythm of the cabin the way a bird learns the contours of a long branch. She boiled, she mended, she rode out on short errands with Miles to check fences. The land had its own brutal honesty. It demanded work and gave no excuses. She rose early, wrapped in quilts, and felt the cold bite into the small seams of her courage. Miles watched her with a guarded curiosity. He watched how she carried a healing touch like an old secret, turning dull, battered things soft again with small hands. He watched how Nora's laughter came quicker in the cabin now. He watched, and slowly, he learned to expect her presence like a new kind of weather. Not thunder, not storm, a steady, warming sun. Once when they were mending a broken plow together, Elena spoke of the Odells in a halting way. "They come for anything that moves," she said. "Anything they can claim. They sold people before. Men without scruples." Miles grunted. "You run with wit, not speed, then." "They're dumb where it counts." She looked at him, then really looked, at the softness that waited under the hard planes in his face. "Why did you stay after your wife?" He paused, hands on the plow, as if holding a splintered truth. "I promised I'd keep living for Nora." He would not say he'd been a ghost, moving through days like a man with gloves on at his own heart. But Elena saw the shadow there. She'd been running from one kind of death. He'd been living in another. Winter settled into small rituals. Nora braided Elena's hair and named the braids like ships. Brave, kind, strong. Miles taught Elena how to split wood so that her strokes fell dead center, like prayers. She taught Nora how to stitch a wound and how to make tea that tasted like calm. Food would be scarce. They rationed meat and saved flour like treasure. Word traveled slow in the valley, but it moved. A neighbor called by and left a cob of corn. Another left a jar of peaches preserved last summer. People watched from a distance and judged quickly whether the newcomer would be trouble or blessing. The Odells visited twice more, once with Tom's swagger and threats, and once with a thin-lipped deputy who wanted to see the papers. Miles produced nothing but a stubborn set of eyes and the kind of quiet that makes a deputy uncomfortable. The law there was a compass with two directions only: treacherous or useless. Miles had neither paper nor badge to brandish. He had persistence and the slow backup of neighbors who owed him favors. Elena kept to herself mostly. At night she sat by the hearth and hummed. Sometimes she mended Nora's toy horses, hands steady as a surgeon's. Sometimes she sat awake and listened for hooves, for torches, for the soft sniff of violence in the dark. One night, shaken out of sleep, she stumbled outside and walked into the whiteness until the world was only her breath and the crusting snow. Miles followed, finding her like a thing that was always supposed to be found. They stood together in the cold, two figures cut by moonlight. "Elena," he said softly, "you can tell me about it when you're ready." She wanted to tell him everything then. The names of the men who'd corralled them, the promises that had smelled like safe houses but were barbed, the wagon that had tipped, and the river that had taken more than it gave. She wanted to give him the rawness that had been her constant company. But the words felt like knives at the throat, and she clutched the collar of her coat instead. "I ran because I thought running would be enough," she said at last. "But men pursue what they want. Some men don't stop because you hide. Some men don't stop because you beg. I thought if I could get far enough, I could start again." Miles watched the frost in her lashes catch the moonlight. "There's no starting without scars," he said. "But there's starting with company." She looked at him then. Really looked. Not at his hands that split wood, not at the steady arch of his shoulders, but at the tired softness in his eyes. "Will you help me hide then?" she asked with a small, fierce honesty. He took a breath, the canyon of his chest filling and emptying like a bellows. "Yes," he said simply. "I'll help." In the weeks that followed, they tightened their circle. Miles took to riding patrol rounds more often, circling the fence line at dusk. Talbot stopped by with a gun every other night and stayed to play riddles with Nora. The Odells grumbled from the edges of town but never came close enough to draw a clear line. Under their threat, Elena healed in ways that paper and law could not touch. She learned to sleep without nightmares cutting her breath. She learned to laugh again when Nora told a story about a chicken that had tried to fly and ended up in a haystack. She learned how to plant beans in a slope of earth and watch life bloom out of winter blackness. And sometimes, in the quiet, when the world was only the soft creak of the roof and the slow heartbeat of the cabin, Miles would pick up the wooden horse he had carved, still rough at the edges, and look at Elena across the lamplight. There were things neither of them said aloud, heavy as river stones. A future sat there, fragile and begging. One evening, weeks after the men with torches had disappeared into rumor, Elena found a seat beside Miles at his bench. The wood-smelling warmth wrapped them. "You could leave if you wanted," she said, not looking at him. "Find another life somewhere else." He set the plane down and looked at her with something like awe to it. "I can't make you stay." She smiled, but it was a small, hopeful thing. "You could make it possible for me," he said. She met his eyes then, and they held each other like promises. "Maybe I don't want to run anymore." Miles's fingers closed once in a decisive grip around the plane. He set it aside. "We'll make sure they don't take you," he said. Outside, the wind waltzed the top of the pines, and for the first time since she'd been found like a thing in the snow, Elena believed, or at least entertained the dangerous, thrilling idea, that perhaps this place could be more than shelter. Maybe it could be home. They had a long winter yet. They had threats that could resurface like shadows. Men like the Odells didn't always accept "not today" as an answer. But in the glow of the hearth, with a child's laugh like a bell, and a steady man who didn't flinch at hard things, Elena felt the raw edge of hope settle into something that might hold. And when Nora, sleepy-eyed and small, crawled into Elena's lap and asked her to tell the story of how she'd found them again, Elena began with a laugh and a tremor, and told the truth in a quiet voice. "It was the lantern," she said, "and the man who carried it." Nora's arms tightened. Miles felt something somewhere in his chest unknot, small and sudden like the first thaw. Outside, the mountains wore their white crowns. Inside, for the first time in a long while, 3 people sat close and let themselves be whole for an hour. The war was not over. The Odells still breathed in the valley, and storms could come without notice. But inside the cabin, pieces were mending by degrees. They were not healed, not yet, but they were together, and together they would make a stand. Winter broke slowly that year, as if the season itself was unwilling to loosen its grip on the valley. The snow softened, the creek began to murmur again, and the air carried a damp promise of thaw. But the danger that had shadowed Elena across the mountains didn't melt with the frost. It changed shape, grew quiet, and waited. Miles Cutter sensed the shift before anyone else. He always did. Men who had buried love understood storms before the clouds came. They felt trouble in their bones, in the way the wind skipped, in how the animals went still. One morning in late February, he found tracks near the northern fence line. Boot prints, 3 pairs, fresh. He didn't tell Elena that day. He didn't want to break the thin thread of peace she had found. Instead, he checked the rifle twice, then 3 times, walked the perimeter with a lantern even in sunlight, made Nora stay close to the cabin, put extra wood by the door. But danger was a patient beast. It didn't break in all at once. It seeped. The day the Odells finally returned was the first. Afternoon, the creek ice cracked. With a summer's sound, Elena was washing Nora's hair outside in a wooden basin, the child shrieking with cold and giggling between the gasps. The sun felt warm for once. Miles watched them from the porch, hands still dusty from repairing a loose shutter. When Elena laughed, really laughed, Miles stopped what he was doing and simply listened. He hadn't heard that sound in years. Not since Sarah. Not since before the winter that had broken so much inside him. Elena glanced up and caught him staring. "What?" she asked, cheeks flushed pink. "That laugh," he said. "Feels like the sun came early." She blushed, brushing Nora's wet curls aside to hide her face. Before she could say anything, Talbot rode up fast, dust rising behind his horse. Miles straightened. Talbot rarely moved fast unless a fire or a funeral was involved. "Riders," the old man said, breath misting in the cool air. "Saw 3 of 'em. Headed your way. Didn't look friendly." Miles's jaw locked. Elena froze. Nora looked between the adults, confusion stirring. "Are they?" Elena whispered. Miles nodded once. Stay close. Elena pulled Nora to her side. The girl pressed against her without question. Talbot dismounted, rifle ready. They're looking to corner you, boy. I'd bet my last winter stores on it. Miles's gaze slid toward the tree line. They won't corner us. But he didn't look confident. Not entirely. Not today. The riders arrived at dusk. Sunset bled gold over the mountains, stretching long shadows across the valley. The horses appeared as silhouettes first, dark shapes moving with slow, deliberate rhythm. The Odells rode like they thought the land belonged to them, like the world would step aside because they expected it to. Tom Odell at the front, Hank on his left, and a third man, bigger than both, shoulders like a bear, face covered in old scars. Miles felt his stomach turn. He hadn't seen the third man before. That meant he was the dangerous one. You stay inside, Miles murmured to Elena. Lock the back door. Keep Nora behind you. Elena swallowed hard. Miles, do what I say. His voice wasn't angry. It was fear held tight. She obeyed. The men tied their horses near the fence and approached on foot, boots crunching over half-melted snow. Tom raised a hand in false greeting. Evening, Cutter. Miles didn't offer a smile. Evening. You know why we're here. No, Miles said calmly. You're trespassing. Tom laughed, turning to his brothers. Hear that? Man's got bark. Then back to Miles. She belongs with us. No one belongs to you. You think you know what she is? Tom asked, voice sly. You think she told you the truth? Miles didn't blink. I know enough. And he did. Not all the facts, but enough to know she was a human being, scared and hunted, deserving of safety more than anything. Tom's eyes narrowed. Her previous employer wants her back. That's a lie, Elena whispered from inside the doorway. Though Miles had told her to hide, she stepped into the fading light. The moment the Odells saw her, something ugly sparked in their expressions, something that made Miles's fists clench. Hank spat on the ground. There she is. The scarred man stepped forward first. You run fast for a governess. Elena stiffened. I know you, she said quietly. You were with them at the river. Smart girl. Miles moved in front of her. Hank sneered. Move, Cutter. We don't want to hurt the kid. That was the wrong sentence. Miles's voice dropped to a growl. You mention my daughter again, and you won't leave this property. Tom stepped forward. Last chance. Hand her over or we'll take her. We don't care if the law don't reach this valley. Miles lifted his rifle. Elena grabbed his arm. No, they'll shoot you. Let them try, he said. Talbot cocked his rifle from behind the woodpile. 3 guns on you boys now. Seems unwise. But the Odells weren't playing fair. The scarred man whistled. From behind the trees, 2 more men emerged. Miles swore under his breath. They weren't 3. They were 5. Hank smirked. Outnumbered now, Cutter. Miles didn't retreat. He stood taller. Put your hands on her, he said quietly, and I swear I'll put you in that dirt. Tom raised his hand. Elena gasped. And the scarred man lunged. The world snapped into motion. Miles fired first. Talbot fired second. The men scattered like wolves in a hail of snow and gun smoke. Nora screamed from inside. Elena pulled her down behind the door frame. Miles tackled the scarred man, both hitting the ground hard. Snow exploded around them as fists flew. Hank charged Talbot only to receive the butt of a rifle to the chin. Tom slipped behind the shed, pistol drawn, eyes locked on Elena like a predator. Miles pinned the scarred man, forearm crushing his throat. The man swung wildly, fingers clawing for Miles's eyes. You ain't taking her, Miles snarled. She ain't yours. The man choked. No, Miles growled. She's Elena. From the doorway, Nora screamed again. Mama? The word froze the fighting. Elena's heart jolted at the sound. The scarred man twisted his head and saw Nora, saw the child, saw fear, saw Elena, and he smiled. That smile told Elena everything she needed to know. He would kill them all. He rose fast, wrestling Miles's grip free. He reached for a gun at his belt. Elena stepped forward without thinking. She grabbed the nearest thing, a metal kettle full of boiling wash water, and flung it with all her strength. The scalding water hit the man square in the face. He howled. Miles seized the moment. 1 punch. 2. A final blow to the temple. The man fell into the snow, unmoving. Hank stopped fighting when he saw his brother fall. Tom raised his hands. "That's enough," he barked. "We're leaving." Miles didn't lower his rifle. Tom spat blood onto the snow. "This ain't over, Cutter. You'll regret this. You come back here again," Miles said, eyes cold as stone. "And you will regret breathing." Tom backed away slowly, helping Hank to his feet. The two additional men slunk away like shadows returning to the trees. Their horses carried them out of the valley. But their threat stayed behind, hanging in the air like the echo of a storm. Silence settled. Deep, terrible. Elena knelt where she was, chest heaving. Miles dropped beside her, gripping her shoulders. "You okay?" She nodded, but tears burned hot in her eyes. Nora ran to Elena, sobbing into her dress. Elena held her tight, burying her face in the child's curls. "Mama!" Nora cried again, gripping her. Elena's breath hitched. She didn't correct her. Miles heard it too. His heart twisted painfully. Not because he objected, but because he felt something he'd buried for 2 years surge forward. Hope. Talbot leaned on his rifle. "We showed 'em today," he said, breathless. "But they'll be back with more." Miles nodded grimly. "I know." Elena looked up at him, eyes fearful. "I put you and Nora in danger. If I leave now—" "You're not leaving," Miles cut in. "I should," she whispered. "If they find me here—" "They already did." Miles brushed the snow from her cheek. His hand lingered a moment too long. "You're staying," he said softly. "You stay until we make sure they can't come for you again." Elena stared at him, tears spilling. "Miles, why?" He exhaled shakily. "Because losing you—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "Abu would feel like losing everything all over again." Her breath trembled. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. For the first time, she let herself lean into him. And Miles held her like he'd been waiting. For that moment since the day he found her half dead in the snow. That night, after Talbot went home to gather more allies and the fire warmed the cabin, Miles stood alone in the doorway. He watched the trees, the shadows, the ridgeline. Elena joined him quietly, Nora asleep in her arms. "They'll come back," Elena whispered. "Yes," Miles said. "You're not scared?" "I am," he admitted. "But not for myself." Elena swallowed. "For me?" "For both of you." She shifted Nora carefully and reached out with one hand. Her fingers brushed Miles's. He didn't move away. The world outside was dangerous. But inside the cabin, something brave was growing. Something worth fighting for. Something worth dying for. In the quiet, Elena whispered the words she'd never said before. "I don't want to run anymore." Miles closed his fingers around hers, slow and deliberate. "Then you won't." And something inside both of them, fragile and frozen for too long, finally began to thaw. The final snow of winter arrived quietly. Not with wind, not with thunder. Just a soft hush. Flakes drifting down, like someone shaking feathers from a sky-wide pillow. But inside the Cutter cabin, nobody felt calm. Miles stood at the window, rifle slung over his shoulder. Elena sat by the fire, stitching a tear in Nora's coat. The child slept curled against her, head resting in Elena's lap like she'd been molded there. The Odell's attack had changed everything. Miles had seen it in the way Elena flinched whenever a horse neighed in the distance. Elena had seen it in the way Miles slept with the rifle within reach. Nora had sensed it in the way adults whispered, when they thought she wasn't listening. The valley wasn't safe. Not yet. But something else had changed too. Elena no longer looked like a visitor. She moved through the cabin with the ease of someone who belonged. She stoked the fire without being asked, helped Miles mend tools, braided Nora's hair each morning, and hummed while cooking. The way women do when they feel safe enough to let their voice be soft. Miles noticed everything, and every small moment felt like a miracle. Talbot showed up 3 nights later, stepping into the cabin with his hat dusted in snow. "They're moving again," he said. Miles didn't ask who. He already knew. Elena set down her needle. "Where?" "South side of the ridge, 5 men. Got the look of folks preparing for something." Elena's stomach twisted. "They won't stop." "No," Talbot agreed. "But neither will we." Miles turned to Elena. "You trust me?" he asked. Her answer was immediate. "With my life." Then listen. We're not running. We're ending this. She swallowed. Ending? How? Miles lifted the rifle off his shoulder. By showing them these hills ain't theirs. Elena's breath shook. But what if… You think I'll let them near you again? He whispered. Near Nora? He took one step closer. Her heartbeat stuttered. No force on this earth can take you away now. She looked up at him. Really looked. And something in her chest loosened, softening like snow melting under sun. Then we face them together, she said. Miles touched her cheek with rough, calloused fingers. Together. The plan was simple. Simple, not safe. Talbot rode to gather the nearby ranch families. The Powells, the McClarys, the Harlans. Word spread quick when danger was near. Men came because they respected Miles, because he'd helped them mend fences, recover livestock, and bury loved ones. Miles wasn't loud, wasn't charismatic, but the valley knew he stood firm. At dawn, 10 men gathered near the creek crossing, rifles in hand. Miles checked each gun, tightened each saddle strap. Elena stood beside him, hands shaking only a little. You stay with Nora, Miles told her. Elena's heart dropped. No, I can fight, and I can't lose you. His voice cracked. Not again, not after I just… He stopped himself. Elena stepped closer, placing her hand over his. Miles Cutter, she whispered. You didn't lose me. I'm right here. Nora tugged Elena's dress. Mama Elena stays with me, right? Elena froze. Miles froze. Talbot raised a brow. Mama, Elena, Miles repeated softly, the words settling into the cabin of his chest like warm embers. Elena swallowed hard. If that's what she wants to call me. Miles shook his head. No, that's what we call you. Emotion burned her eyes. But this was not the moment to break. Miles cupped her face with both hands and kissed her forehead. A silent promise, full of meaning and fear and hope. I'll come back, he whispered. You better, Elena whispered back. Then Miles mounted his horse and rode with the valley men toward the ridge. Hours passed. Snow fell. The world felt too quiet. Elena paced the cabin, tried reading to Nora, tried stirring soup, tried breathing. Nothing settled the storm inside her. When the first gunshots cracked in the distance, her knees weakened. Nora clutched her dress. Mama Elena, is Daddy okay? Elena knelt and held Nora tight. Your father is the bravest man I've ever known. She didn't add, please come back. Please don't disappear like the others I've lost. More gunshots. Then silence. Terrible, suffocating silence. Minutes stretched long. Then, hoofbeats. Fast, hard, moving toward the cabin. Elena's breath stopped. Was it Miles? Or… The door burst open, and Miles stumbled inside. Alive, breathing hard, face bruised. But alive. Elena choked on a sob and ran to him. She crashed into his chest, arms wrapping around him like she'd feared she'd never hold him again. He held her too, fiercely, desperately. I told you, he whispered into her hair. I'd come back. She trembled against him. What happened? It's done, he said. They're gone. Gone? Talbot came in behind him, blood on his sleeve, but smiling tiredly. Let's just say they won't be bothering this valley or any woman again. Nora ran to her father, clinging to his legs. You're okay. Miles lifted her up, kissed her cheek. I'm all right, honey. Elena stepped back only to take his face in both her hands. You're hurt, she whispered. A little. She kissed his cheek where the bruise was forming. You scared me. You scare me more, he murmured. Why? Because I can't imagine life without you anymore. Her breath hitched. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. Marry me? Elena froze. Miles swallowed nervously. I know it's fast. I know there's danger. I know the world is broken and ugly sometimes. But when you showed up on my land, half dead and frozen, something inside me woke up. Something I thought died with Sarah. He took her hands in both of his. I don't want you to leave. I don't want you running ever again. And I don't want to spend another winter without your voice in this cabin. Stay with us. Be family. Be home. Elena's vision blurred with tears. I thought I'd lost everything, she whispered. And then I found you. You and Nora saved me long before I ever stepped through your door. Her hands tightened around his. Yes, she said softly. Miles blinked. Yes? Yes. Elena laughed through tears. I'll marry you. Nora squealed so loud Talbot covered his ears. Mama, Elena is gonna stay forever. Elena hugged the little girl tightly. Forever, she whispered. Miles pulled both of them close, arms wrapping around them like he'd been waiting years to do it. Snow fell soft outside. A new season waited on the horizon. And inside that small cabin, 3 people. Broken, lost, found, stitched together by winter, finally felt whole. Spring arrived early. Wildflowers burst along the fence line. The creek ran clear. Birds returned to the eaves. The valley felt brighter, warmer, like it approved of the choices made that winter. The wedding was small. Just Talbot, the McClarys, 2 Harlan boys, Nora with flowers braided in her hair. Miles stood nervously in a clean shirt, hands shaking more than they had during the gunfight. Elena walked toward him in a simple dress Nora had helped her stitch, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like sunlight after a long storm. When she reached Miles, he took her hands and whispered, "Welcome home." Elena smiled, eyes bright. "I've been home since the night you carried me from the snow." The valley wind stirred around them, gentle and warm. They kissed, not the desperate kind, but the kind full of promises, of warmth, of healing. A kiss that said, "We survived. We chose each other. We are family now." Nora cheered loud enough for the whole ridge to hear. Talbot wiped a tear from his eye and muttered, "About damn time." That night, after the candles had burned low and Nora had fallen asleep holding the wooden horse Miles had carved her months before, Elena stood with Miles on the porch. The stars stretched endless above them. The mountains watched like ancient witnesses. Miles wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin resting on her shoulder. "Do you regret anything?" he asked softly. Elena leaned back into him. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." He kissed her hair, slow and full of gratitude. "We made it," she whispered. "We did," he murmured. "Together." Miles tightened his hold on her, heart full for the first time in years. Together. And in that moment, with spring blooming and winter finally loosening its hold, Elena realized something. She had not been found by accident. She had been found by fate. And she wasn't running anymore. She was home.